Are you the kind of person who wakes up in the morning and says, I know I'm capable of more? There are goals out there you set, and you're going to achieve them, and you'll let nothing stand in your way. I'm Sean Stasko, co-founder of Sword Performance Products. We created a new endurance product line for people just like you who sweat. Those who live to find their wall, then break it down. Those who don't believe in luck, but make their own. Sword Endurance is an all-natural drink mix built for those people chasing that inspired performance. I encourage you to learn more about the products on our website and use Heartland Runner to receive 20% off your first order. Be inspired to push your boundaries. Drink Sword.
Welcome to the Heartland Running Podcast. Join Crystal, Andy, and Chandler as they explore all things running related in the Heartland and beyond.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Heartland Running Podcast. I'm really excited to talk to our guest this evening. That way we can learn a little bit about trail running. I'm also excited that there were so many people who are on our Facebook page that admitted so many questions, so that way we can pick her brain and learn a little bit about what she is doing, what she has learned throughout the years. Anyway, I'm Andy.
And I'm Crystal.
All right. And Chandler is on assignment, and so he won't be with us this evening. But either way, it doesn't matter. First of all, many of our listeners are looking to cross over into some trail running and even tackling some of the ultra distance. So we decided to invite the woman who wrote the book on trail running, literally, to join us and answer your questions on this podcast. So Sarah Lavender Smith is a long distance runner, coach, writer, and mom of 2 teens. In 2017, she released her book, The Trail Runner's Companion, a step-by-step guide to trail running and racing, from 5Ks to ultras. So welcome to the Heartland Running Podcast, Sarah.
Hey, thank you so much. What a great intro, and I'm so happy to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And I think this is going to be exciting to be able to answer all of these questions that people who listen to the podcast, people who follow the Facebook page, and they want to get into ultra, or maybe they're in ultra right now or in trail running, and they want to learn a little bit more. But first of all, congratulations on your second place finish at the Montana Mountain Marathon yesterday.
Thank you. Well, it's called Montera. It's
Montera. I'm sorry.
It was in Pacifica, which is south of San Francisco, and finishing second in it is like being kind of a medium-sized fish in a very, very small puddle. It was a really small field. It was not a big race, but it was just a training run for me. I needed to get in a solid, hard 26-mile effort to build up for some upcoming races. So
you feeling all right? Are you doing good?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. So anyway, well, what is all on the calendar for you for 2018, so we can get an idea of what you're going to do from here on out? Because I mean, you said this was a training run.
Yes. So I am in California through April before I move to Colorado. So this spring, I'm building up to my main goal race is called the Canyons 100K. And I'm really excited about it because it's on the Western States 100 Trail near Auburn, California, and in the foothills of California. This trail is so special to me, and I had sort of a once-in-a-lifetime experience to do the Western States 100 in 2016, and I'll probably never get the chance again. And I'm pretty oriented toward being in Colorado now during June when Western States is held. So this race is an opportunity to get back on the Western States course, and it comprises the hilliest canyon part of the Western States Trail. So that's a tough 100K. And in preparation for that, I will do the Marin Ultra Challenge 50K in mid-March. So that's the spring. And then I transitioned to Colorado, where I've started living half the year in the southwestern corner of the state, which is a real transition to high altitude running. And so to help prepare for that, over Memorial Day weekend at the end of May, I will attend Coach Jason Koop's Memorial Weekend high altitude training camp in Colorado Springs. And Jason Koop is a really well-known, well-credentialed coach who's been pretty influential on me as a runner and coach. So I'm very excited for a block of 3 days at high altitude and high mileage. And that will help get me ready for my 2 big summer races, the first of which is the San Juan Solstice 50 miler around the Lake City and Silverton areas of the San Juan Mountains. That'll be super tough, sort of like a mini hard rock 100. And then I'm doing something big and scary at the end of July, which is the Ouray 100 miler. And this will be definitely the hardest 100 miler I've ever attempted because of the combination of the elevation and the extreme weather that we tend to face that time of year in the San Juan Mountains. And this is similar to Hard Rock 100 in that it strings together 12 or 13 major mountain passes, each of which goes to 12 or 13,000 feet, and any one of which would be like a serious day hike. So you try to do them all together, and you go through more than one sunset. I mean, they have a 48-hour limit, and in a typical 100-miler, you try to break 24 hours, and a 100-miler in this kind of condition, a 36-hour is considered very good, but you're likely going into 40 hours and into a second night. So you're dealing with sleep deprivation and, as I said, some extreme weather as well as pretty gnarly terrain. So that's what I have planned for the first half of the year. And then the second half, the only thing on my calendar is there's a really fun race here in Northern California, classic trail race called the Dipsy, on a very famous 7-mile trail north of San Francisco. And so over Thanksgiving weekend, they have the quad Dipsy where you go back and forth and back and forth. So going to do the quad Dipsy. That's about it.
All right. Well, sounds like you've got a lot of big races on your schedule this year. And, there's lots of different types of runners. There's the runners who will, do like one big run a year and then that's it. Or maybe, one in the fall, one in the spring. Sounds like, you just kind of spread things out all throughout the year, and sounds like you're just a real proficient runner. I mean, you're just running all the time.
Yes and no. I think it's very important to divide your year into training cycles. I mean, it's the classic concept of periodization. And so I tend to have either 4-month or 6-month buildups to a goal. And then I take definitely many weeks off. And at the end of the year, usually December, I take a month where I do minimal training, I do other sports, and I really give my legs and brain a rest.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds really smart, what you're talking about. And when it comes to a smart runner, let's kind of get into, the coaching aspect of it, because, that's what you need to do to be able to coach someone. Is you need to be able to be smart, and then think about, the aspects of, how is this going to affect a runner physically, and, how they can recover and then be ready for that next race. So, I'd love to hear about, a little bit about your coaching. What's your coaching philosophy, and how it is that you deal with runners that, you're responsible for.
Okay. Well, I coach a variety of runners. I tend not to coach younger runners, although I've been a middle school cross-country coach, and right now I'm mentoring a group of high school students, but that's sort of a different thing. Mainly I coach adults of all levels, but they tend to be either transitioning from road to trail or trying to graduate to a longer distance. And it completely depends on the individual, what stage they're in. I mean, if they're coming back from injury, then we're just trying to rebuild a base, which means building consistency and getting into a consistent training pattern. So they might not have a race on their calendar, but their goal is to get back to healthy running 4 or 5 times a week. And what I try to do is help them structure their training week, structure their month. So really, one of my philosophies is, and I take this from the legendary coach Jack Daniels, so it's not something I came up with, it's what helped me as a runner and helped a lot of other runners, is to know the purpose of every run. So when you go out the door, you have in mind what you're going to do. So it may be an easy, mellow social run with friends where you keep it at a conversational pace. And there's a real value in that kind of a run. But the idea is you do it deliberately. And then on other days, you have in mind, like, okay, this is my high intensity, hard day where I'm going to do this type of speed work. And so you go out and do that. And so knowing the idea of every run before you go out the door gets you out of the gray zone of ambivalence or of medium effort. And hand in hand with that idea is my principle of you want to alternate easy and hard days and make your easy days easy and your hard days hard. So in any given training week, I like to structure the week around 3 key hard or high quality runs, which generally is some form of speed work midweek, some form of hill work midweek that also goes slightly longer in duration, and then a depleting long run on the weekend. So if you can anchor your week around those 3 high quality hard runs, layer in easy runs or rest days around them, and then also layer in some strength conditioning, which is also key, then that's about it. And then you gradually, you establish that consistency, and then you build up your training volume. And then looking more at the macro sense, you think, okay, how am I going to build in some recovery weeks in those higher weeks? And so that's what I do as a coach is help the client plan and figure out what are their goals and then how do you build up to that.
Okay. So, I'm a road guy. It's it's what I like, but I've done some trail stuff. What is the biggest challenge that you found with someone who is, who's moving from that road background and moving into the trails? And what's the biggest challenge and roadblocks that those people have? And maybe it's mental roadblocks, or maybe it's things that are so different compared to the road to doing trails and maybe even possibly the trail ultras. What's that big thing that person has to get past to be successful?
Well, if they've been a serious competitive road runner, let's say they're, relatively fast, committed, long distance road runner who spent the whole year training really seriously to break 3:30 in a marathon. So they've been training for a marathon. They know that to break 3:30 in a marathon, they're going to have to run consistent 8-minute miles. So they've dialed into what an 8-minute pace feels like. They've done speed work at sub 8, and they've done long runs kind of slower than 8-minute, but then sped up to 8. So they're so focused on that pacing and that consistent pacing on relatively flat, smooth terrain. So you take that same runner out into a hilly, mountainous route with a lot of jagged elevation profile, a lot of rocky rooted terrain. One of the challenges that they face is suddenly they're struggling to maintain a 10-minute mile because it's so much slower. And so mentally they may be really down on themselves saying, my God, this is only a 10-minute mile. I'm an 8-minute mile marathoner. This feels so slow. And so they might cope with negativity. And so first is just the mental shift, saying, okay, out here on the trail, you're going to have a lot more variability. And generally speaking, the average pace is going to be significantly slower. So one of the things I do in my book, because I wanted to illustrate the difference between road running and some extreme trail running, is I gave the example, I told the story of my first trail marathon and how radically different it was in so many ways from doing a big city marathon like Boston. And so this was back in the mid 2000s when I was faster as a road runner. I could break 40 minutes at the 10K. My marathon time was in the low 3 hours. So I go out to this hilly trail marathon that summits a mountain twice. And it talks about just the high degree of variability and all the crazy things I encounter, and how at the, basically to cut to the chase, it took me over 5 hours. And it's still, I was one of the top females. I mean, it was that much slower and that much more difficult. And it was humbling. And it tested me in ways I couldn't fathom. And it moves my body in different ways. You know, when you're running roads, there's a repetition of motion. Whereas when you're scrambling over different stuff and adjusting your pace and power hiking on a trail marathon, you're moving your body in different ways. So getting back to your question, some of the challenges people face is just that adjustment to the variability and learning how to be mentally flexible and cultivate patience, and also to prepare accordingly, especially if you're running in the backcountry. I mean, it's one thing to run a dirt trail in a well-known park in a county park or something that's not that much in the wilderness. But if you get into the true wilderness, you need to prepare accordingly. So those are some of the challenges.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I keyed into whenever I was listening to you describe what you're going to be doing here in the future, and that you had mentioned that I'm going to do this race and this one's going to have a lot of elevation. And so, you know, just that right there, you know, you were saying, you were kind of communicating to me that, okay, this is going to be a little slower paced race, or it's not going to, and, you know, you have identified that this race right here is going to have some more challenges, and it, you know, it's not going to be a faster one that's going to be an easier course. And so yeah, that's kind of one of the things that, you know, I would think with myself, if I were to look at a race, that I'm going to go, you know, I'm not going to run this thing at this pace. It's going to be, I'm going to run the course. I'm not going to run the race, unlike a road race to where you're going to set your pace and you're going to go, you know. When it comes to and I'm just guessing this because I'm not very experienced with the trail runs, but I'm thinking that I'm going to run according to the trail, according to the route, not according to what I've done in the past.
Absolutely. And this, so I really learned this and came to appreciate it back in 2011. I went to an ultra running camp with the Western States champion, Jeff Rose, up in Juneau, Alaska. And he introduced me to the concept of really expanding your definition of running, so that running is not just moving at a gait where one foot is always off the ground. It's not thinking of running as being, you know, from a 6-minute to 12-minute pace. Rather, think of running as moving as efficiently as you can over whatever the terrain presents. And so under that definition, downshifting to hiking and thinking of hiking as a lower gear of running makes the most sense when you are trying to ascend a mountainside that's covered with scree and talus, you know, or a slope, you know, you're traversing a snow slope. That really helps with mountain and ultra running, to think of it just as doing whatever is most efficient based on what the trail presents.
All right. So I've just got one more question. I think Crystal's going to talk to you a little bit about your book. But the last question I have is, you know, what's your favorite type of athlete to work with? And then just to follow up on that, what's the best way for people to find you if they were interested in any coaching advice or actual coaching?
My favorite type of athlete to work with, I've never been asked that question, but that's a really good question. I would say it's someone who has a medium level of experience, so they still have a lot of potential. They're not like at the upper echelons, just trying to really fine tune, but someone who comes to me relatively knowledgeable with a pretty solid fitness base, but a lot of room for improvement, and just enthusiastic, someone who really cares. And then also someone who has a sense of humor, like people who are just dreadfully serious or data driven. You know, I want to keep it fun and I want you to listen to your body more than look at the numbers. I don't want people who really overthink or just too serious. Then I think maybe they have some other psychological issues going on.
Well, I think people who do 100-milers have psychological issues. I really do.
I mean, I take that back. If they are a professional athlete, then yes, you definitely want to be very serious. And I take my running very, very seriously. But at the end of the day, it should also be fun, and you've got to be flexible and adaptable, and have a sense of humor always.
I think that's great.
Love that.
Yeah.
And then what is the best way for people to find you?
Oh, right. So I have a professional site called SarahLavenderSmith.com that explains my coaching and has my portfolio of my writing. But mostly I say check out my blog, which is called therunnerstrip.com. And you can find me on social media. My Twitter and Instagram handle is @SarahRunning.
Great. And I also have to thank you to your blog. I think it's the last entry that was in there actually showed up in my inbox at a very appropriate time. And it was the one about taking life lessons from running ultras. And it was talking about how, I guess, one of your sons was going through a tough spot and what we can learn from running an ultra and apply it to when we're in a tough spot in life. And I happened to be going through my absolute crazy period at work. I had all this stuff going on and I'm like, it made a lot of sense. So we'll put links to all of that in the show notes, but I just wanted to thank you for that because I'm like, it made a lot of sense.
Oh, I really appreciate that feedback. You know, sometimes when I do a blog post, I feel like it's going into a black hole. My blog, I need to update my blog. I call it my neglected child because it's the last to get fed. But that last blog post was inspired by my son feeling really overwhelmed and inadequate academically at school, and how I took lessons from ultra running to help with my parenting. And it's the same kind of lessons I use whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, which is how, writing this book and doing a book project was like doing an ultra, and how I drew on lessons from ultra running to make it manageable.
It's wonderful because normally I feel like we do the other way around where we take these life lessons and when we're in a tough spot in an ultra, we think it through that way. So it was very cool to see it go in the other direction.
Thank you.
And before we go into your book, you also mentioned before we started recording, a cool project you have coming up this summer. So I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to talk about that as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I am hosting a 4-day, 3-night mountain running camp in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado near Silverton and Ouray. And this is it's organized by a guy Jared Vilhauer, who's a very experienced ultra runner and guide, and has a company called Highland Adventures, sorry. And he and another woman organized this camp and invited me to be a co-guide and the coach. So it'll be a small group of runners who want to sharpen their trail running skills and see a gorgeous slice of the San Juan Mountains near Telluride and Silverton. And we're staying in this really awesome off-the-grid cozy lodge up in the mountains. And we'll just be running on parts of the Hard Rock 100 course. And I'm excited to share a lot of mountain running techniques, such as safety techniques, trekking poles, uphill, downhill techniques, all that kind of good stuff. So the first date is July 11th, and the second date is September 23rd.
Oh, awesome. That sounds absolutely amazing. So we'll make sure we have links to that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's very cool. So now on to the book. So the book, again, the name of it is The Trail Runner's Companion, a step-by-step guide to trail running and racing from 5Ks to ultras. And let me just say, it is a fantastic book. So I want people to truly appreciate how wonderful it is. And it isn't like a little trail running brochure or anything. It's close to 300 pages. And if you have a question, I can guarantee you that it's in there somewhere. I mean, I was flipping through it and I'm like, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. So it should be required reading for everyone.
Thank you.
What inspired you to write the book?
So the book project actually came to me, fortunately enough. So I'm the kind of person who's sort of like a procrastinator due to perfectionism. So I always wanted to write a book, but it seemed overwhelming. I thought, I could never do this. I could never make it what I want. And then the publisher, Falcon Guides, approached me because they wanted to, they know that trail running's hot and they wanted to publish a trail running book. And I was recommended to them. I said, well, here's the deal. I would love to do this project, but I don't want to be a boring how-to book. I want it to be something really readable. And I don't want it to be just about performance. I want it to be about the sport's character and ethos and some of the history. So I will do this book if you let me incorporate some of my voice and storytelling in it, because I don't want it to be just like a manual that feels like homework to read. So they said, yeah, it could be whatever you want. So I said, well, that's great. So I got the proposal together. I outlined it. And then I procrastinated for 6 months and and then I drew on those ultra running lessons of, okay, break it down and take it aid station to aid station or chapter to chapter. And I just tried to, as I said, make it readable every chapter opens with storytelling. And I wanted to have the kind of book that people can effectively self-train and self-coach on their own. And so it starts out with the fundamentals of how to structure a training week, how to build a base, all the kind of running techniques, how to train for a race of any distance. And then I take those fundamentals and adapt them to ultra distances.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And I'm wondering too, because you talk about doing the blog and it kind of goes out to this black hole out there. I feel like the book would be a little bit different. Have you got a lot of feedback from the book?
Oh, I've gotten wonderful feedback. I really have. I've been gratified by the response.
Good.
So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It's so wonderful. And I have to tell people too, if you are kind of torn on whether you would want the Kindle version or the paper version of this book, I will tell you, I got the Kindle version, which is wonderful. And then Sarah, who is absolutely sweet enough to send us an autographed copy, which we are going to be giving away here in a moment. So I got to see the paper version of it, and now I'm kind of kicking myself and wished I actually would have got the paper version of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it's one of those wonderful ones that it's like the pages are glossy and it's all wonderful. So if you're on the fence, some people are just Kindle purists and some are paper purists, but I will tell you, if you are on the fence, get the paper copy.
Thank you.
Love it.
Well, that's because of I can't take credit for, it's great because of the photos. So there are wonderful photos in there. So that's, I'm grateful to the photographers.
Yeah, it's a wonderful.
That's good. I need pictures. I really do. I need pictures.
Well, this one's perfect for you. So, like I said, we have the autographed copy, and so as part of being in our private Facebook group, which we always encourage people to go there because you get to be a part of stuff like this. We are going to do a drawing for that. So people had submitted that. So I'm actually going to do it live here. So I have everybody who entered's names in here. So I feel like this is all exciting.
Cool.
Let's see.
You're going to do it right now?
We're going to do it right now. And then once this episode comes out, and part of being in our Facebook group is that you do get to preview the episode before it goes live on the Friday. And so they'll find out ahead of time. So you can just get in touch with me and send me your contact information. But the winner is Nick Wright. So congratulations, Nick. And I know Nick is
getting ready to run his first marathon. That's pretty exciting.
So I think this will be, so congratulations, Nick. So get in touch and we will get your copy out to you.
So run that first marathon and get ready to move to the trails.
Awesome.
That's great.
All right. So do you want to jump into, you ready for some listeners' questions?
Sure.
I'm excited about this.
Hit me up.
A ton of them. This is more questions than we have ever gotten for a guest that's coming on. So
yes.
Great.
Wow.
And I had to condense some of them as well, because sometimes one person would ask a question and then, people would chime in and stuff. So sometimes I did pare it down because the same question was asked multiple times in multiple ways. So I think I captured everything though. So if anybody got missed, I'm sorry. It's truly my fault. I think the number one question that we got asked several times in that is really, how do I get started in trail running? And then there's also a lot of concerns about falling.
So, well, first, to get started in trail running, you have to find trails to run. So depending on where you live, research the trails available. I give some tips in my book of how to do that. And one easy trick is to research trail races nearby and then go to the race website where they'll have a course map and just go out and run part or all of the course on your own. So find trails to run and then get mentally and logistically prepared. So mentally prepared is some way I talk to talked a little bit about before, which is take more patience, take more time than you think you'll need. Don't go with any sense of real goals of like, oh, I got to do 5 miles in 45 minutes or whatever. Have some flexibility and go with the mindset to really enjoy it for the sake of being out there, and try to initially go at a really mellow conversational pace. So if you are running too hard or fast and you're spiking your heart rate, downshift at hiking if you need to. So keep it mellow, enjoy the experience. Don't be overly performance oriented. Try to unplug from your devices. I mean, I carry a phone for safety, but I'm not listening to music. I'm not checking notifications. I'm not playing music on my phone with the speaker on. And on that safety note, I do listen to podcasts or music on longer runs, but I always have one ear open for safety. So if you do listen to music or a podcast while you're running, only have an earbud in one ear is my recommendation. And then logistically, you have to be safety conscious if you're going to be in a remote area. You want to plan ahead in terms of knowing where you're going and planning for hydration, calories, and weather considerations. So this gets into safety a little bit, but people always say, how do you feel safe trail running? Aren't you worried about it? And I say, the good news is the two biggest risks you face are very preventable. And in my mind, the two biggest risks are getting lost or dealing with extreme weather, be it heat or cold. So you can prevent getting lost by researching ahead of time, carrying a map, letting someone know where you're going. I mean, there's a whole chapter in my book on safety steps, but that's really important. And then making sure whether it's hot or cold out that you either have extra hydration, sunscreen for heat, all those kinds of things, or you run at a cooler time of day to avoid extreme heat. Or on the other end of the spectrum, that you take extra layers to deal with cold, because runners, this happens to mountain runners all the time. They run without enough layers and they think, oh, I'm warm enough. Well, they're warm enough if they're moving, but if they roll an ankle and they're stuck sitting by the side of the trail, they're going to quickly get too cold. So thinking of safety precautions like that.
That's great.
And then you asked about falling.
Yes.
How to prevent it or how to deal with it? Everyone falls.
See, and I think that's the big message for people who are going from roads to trail. You know what? You're going to fall. And, you might do it like I'm totally graceful when I fall. But I will say one of the things coming, from a road background is I have fallen on the road. I've fallen on the sidewalk. Falling on the road or sidewalk is a million times worse than falling on the trail for the most. I mean, unless you're falling off a cliff or something. But the worst cuts, scrapes, banged up I've ever been has been from tripping on a sidewalk.
Right. So tripping and falling are huge hazards. So let's think about why they happen. Tripping and falling generally happens because you're spaced out and you're shuffling feet. So one thing I coach, whether it's road or trail, and this promotes better running form in general, is I encourage my clients, and I do this myself, to have the mantra in your head: lift up your knees, pick up your feet. Lift up your knees, pick up your feet. So if you think about kind of a high knee lifting, more prancing kind of form, as if you're doing stair repeats, that's actually better kind of running form. And if you're thinking about picking up your knees, lifting up your feet, you're not going to catch a toe. What happens is when people get tired or when they're spaced out, they tend to shuffle. And so even if you're really tired, try never to shuffle your feet and just jog. Even when you're tired, you can take really short baby step kind of running gait, but you can still lift up your toes more. So that's one thing to prevent falling. And then just the key thing is pay attention. I mean, this gets into something I encourage with any kind of running, which is a more mindful running where you're acutely or highly attuned to your surroundings. So instead of spacing out in your head, look around, look where you're going. And so you avoid those tripping hazards.
That's one of the things that I've noticed that which I've done a handful of 50Ks. And, I'm tired. I'm on the trail. And whenever I notice that I start kicking rocks, it's like, okay, that's a problem. I need to start changing my form, or I need to slow down and walk for a little bit till I can get rest up to where I can, handle a good, proper form. But yeah, whenever I start kicking rocks, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that other thing about paying attention too, the funny thing is you tend to pay attention when there's a lot of rocks and roots. And I am famous for tripping when it's completely flat. And you're right. It's because that's when, the mind starts wandering and stuff. So thank you. I need all that advice.
So Alicia, so her concern is specifically running alone on trails, especially trails that she's new to. Mm-hmm. So how do you research the trails to know that they are safe? So I'm assuming that as a woman, she's concerned about her safety with maybe someone who could attack her, or maybe animals or something like that. That's what I'm taking from that. So what can she do to know that a trail, or give her some sort of comfort that a trail is safe for her?
Yeah. This is a tough issue, because I wouldn't want to deprive anyone of the wonderful feeling of running alone. I love going solo by myself in the wilderness. It is safer to run with someone else, but I think it's also a very empowering and special experience to immerse yourself into the wilderness solo. So, I am less afraid of some creeper attacking me than I am of rolling my ankle or encountering a bear. I don't want to minimize the risk of threatening people, but having taken self-defense, I believe that attackers choose their victims when they choose more vulnerable victims, and a more vulnerable person is the person who has earbuds in her ears and is going slowly and not very aware and spaced out. So if you're running with all your senses highly attuned and you don't have earbuds in your ear and you look confident, I think you're going to be less likely to be victimized. But, let's set aside the creeper threat, because I think that's actually pretty minimal. The bigger threat are the safety threats I talked about before, which are just, hurting yourself or getting lost or getting stuck in extreme weather. So you just have to take all the precautions you can. And to enjoy the outdoors, you'll enjoy it more when you're armed with knowledge and when you are well prepared. So I always take extra calories, I take extra hydration, and I know where I'm going, and I tell someone where I'm going in case something bad happens. And I run with a phone. I keep the phone on airplane mode or low battery mode to save power. And then the final thing that I just am a huge advocate of is arming yourself with wilderness first aid knowledge. I just spent 2 weekends ago, I spent both days in 8-hour wilderness first aid courses. And to have that kind of knowledge and to carry a first aid kit and know how to use it if you get hurt or if you come upon someone who needs help is hugely beneficial. I don't think I addressed the risk of animals. Animals, it's hard to get into all the details here, but basically keep your eyes and ears open, make a lot of noise, and you should be okay. I've never had a mountain lion encounter. I've come across bears and they go the other way. I've come across big dogs, angry cows. There's ways to deal with it. Seriously, do not get between a mama cow and her calf, or make her mad, and you might have to run fast, which is what I did. But I'm okay.
And that's the one injury you don't want to come back with. What happened? I got hurt by an angry cow.
Yeah. Oh, feral pigs are the worst.
Oh.
Yeah. And snakes. But there are ways to deal with this. And generally, I think the risk is pretty small. Again, your biggest risk is either getting dehydrated or tripping and falling or hitting your head on a low-lying branch that you don't notice. So just paying attention and planning ahead is the main thing to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of time, in my opinion, that whenever I've been on a trail and I've encountered some sort of animal, As long as you just keep going at your same pace and just ignore them and don't do anything flashy, don't do anything that's going to excite them, they just don't want to be messed with, just like you don't want to be messed with.
Yeah.
And then, and just don't make a big deal out of it. And most of the time it's okay.
And when I'm running by myself in the woods, I sort of get a sixth sense, or, when the hair on the back of your neck starts to go up, you say, I feel like I'm in bear territory. Then I will start singing out loud. I'll say, hey, bear, here I come, bear. And I'll make sing-song kind of la-la noises going down the trail. And it sounds ridiculous. Sometimes I'll turn a corner and there'll be another hiker there and he'll look at me like I'm nuts. I'll say, hey, better safe than sorry.
Yeah, they're standing around looking for where the bear is.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll move on to the next one. Next one is from John. And I know this is always a popular question, is what about shoes? And what's the most important consideration when choosing shoes for trail running?
So the big secret is you actually don't need trail shoes. You can hit the trail in your road shoes and you'll be just fine. I mean, a whole industry has cropped up around trail-specific shoes, and in many ways they're preferable. But if you want to go trail run and you just got your old Nikes or whatever, just go do it. Shoes don't have to be perfect. So the most important thing with shoes is that they feel comfortable. Yeah, everyone has a different foot type. Everyone has different personal preferences. So in my book, I use the analogy. It's like, are you the kind of person, if you have to go over a bumpy, high clearance, 4-wheel drive dirt road, do you want like a Subaru Outback that's kind of low to the ground? Do you want a stripped down rugged Jeep? Or do you want like a cushy Land Rover SUV? That all of them will get you over that road, but they're different types. They feel different. It has to be right for you. I have a lot of friends who like grippy, zero drop, more minimal shoes. I'm more of a Hoka fan for more cushioning. So, my main advice is go to an independently owned local running store staffed by knowledgeable people. Don't buy your shoes online. Like your local running store is a community resource. And even if it costs $5 more to buy shoes from them rather than getting a bargain online, go to that running store, have them help you find the right shoe, and then test it out in the store. Most stores have treadmills, or go run out on the sidewalk out in front of the store to test it out.
All right. Okay. So Charity asks, what basic gear do you recommend when you're trail running? So I guess, let's say just a standard trail run, probably a training run, I would assume, because she didn't mention racing.
So number one is hydration. Like, it's not a big deal. If you run out of calories and bonk, that's not that big of a deal. You'll survive. But if you get dehydrated, then that can be serious. Especially if you're running in a hot area, you always need adequate hydration. So you have a lot of options for hydration. You have handhelds and you have vests. I used to always run with bottles in my hands, and that's perfectly fine. But a few years ago, I became a real convert to hydration vests, and especially the vests that have bottle holders on the shoulder holsters in front. I much prefer that to the vests that have a bladder or a reservoir in back, because when the bottles are in front, you can access them easier, you can refill them easier, and you can see better when they're running out. The other problem with handheld bottles is most people have kind of a big, heavy 20-ounce bottle in one hand, and that tends to lead to some imbalanced or asymmetrical running because you're holding something heavy in one hand but not the other. So if you do like handheld bottles, then I recommend having the same size bottle in both hands. Like Ultimate Direction and some other companies make little 10-ounce bottles. I think it's better to run with 2 10-ounce bottles in both hands for equal balanced running rather than a heavy 20-ounce bottle in one hand. But whatever you do, carry water. I'm laughing because I'm looking at the cover of my book now, And the publisher picked out the cover model. And like the one thing I really don't like about it is the dude forgot his water. Like, he's running without any hydration. So anyway, so that's one key piece of gear. Sun protection. So whether it's a hat or whatever, have sun protection. I'm a big fan of buffs, which is the fabric head wrap that you can wear around your neck. So I generally wear it around my neck for sun protection and to wipe my nose, or I can move it up around my head and cover my ears for warmth or sun protection on my forehead. So if there's any chance of change of weather, of inclement weather, take an extra layer. So extra layers for warmth or for bad weather are really important. Probably the easiest extra layer that you can always shove into a small pocket is a pair of gloves. And so those are the main things. There are a lot of comfort items you can take, like anti-chafing lube and stuck in a pocket. All those things are useful, but start with hydration.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Great. So Jeff S., we have a couple Jeffs. So this is Jeff S., and he has a question, and you've kind of already addressed it, but I didn't know if you had anything to add to it. And he says, how do I get over my irrational fear that every time I step onto a trail, I'm going to get eaten by a bear or a snake?
Well, you can choose more heavily traveled trails. I mean, where I live here in Northern California, we have a regional park district that there are plenty of hikers out on the weekends that are scaring away any coyotes or other critters. So, I mean, it makes me sad that we don't have more wildlife because it's heavily populated. But you can do a lot of trail running where I think the risk for animal encounters is very minimal because it's a pretty well-traveled trail. So that's one thing. The other main thing is don't go at dusk. I mean, there's an advantage to running in the middle of the day for animals anyway, not for snakes, because animals tend to come out at dawn or dusk, the bigger animals. Snakes, however, tend to come out in the heat of the day. So then if you're in a hot area at lunchtime, yeah, you might see a snake. But I have a fear of snakes. I've had a lot of rattlesnake encounters, but they tend not to bother you unless you get close to them.
In my experience with animals, either if I'm hunting or if I'm observing them in nature, is that animals really don't have as big of a range as what we think they do, especially like land-based animals. And so they become aware of the areas that they don't need to go to because it's like, okay, people are there. I just don't want to mess with that. And so I think that a lot of animals avoid trails that are somewhat heavily traveled because they know that, okay, here's people and I'm just going to keep this out of my range of my daily living.
Yeah.
Okay. So Trisha, how does she prevent injury? She has been injured before. And then, I don't think anything major, but I think that she's specifically saying, how does she avoid getting injured on the trail? And I assume that that's going to be like standard running injuries like you would get on the road or wherever else.
Yeah. So, there's so many ways and so many important things to do to prevent injury. So number one is to build recovery into your week, like we talked about at the beginning. So, always adequately recover from hard efforts. And you don't have to take a full rest day, but it means having gentler, lower intensity running on probably flatter terrain after a hard run. I'm a big believer in warming up properly with dynamic stretching. And so I do a 5-minute dynamic stretching routine, which I describe in my book, which warms up your muscles and restores a fuller range of motion before you start running. So if you're an early morning runner who rolls out of bed, puts on your running clothes, gets out the front door, immediately starts to run, you may be more prone to injury at that minute than if you had done 5 minutes of dynamic stretching to warm up for the movement. Then all the little things that aren't so little but really make a difference for body care, I highly encourage, such as foam rolling to keep your muscles sliding and gliding, doing things like if you are prone, as many people are, to Achilles tendonitis or plantar fasciitis, then once or twice a week, take time to take care of your ankles and feet. And it's as simple as doing ankle circles and other ankle exercises, or rolling a ball under your arch and taking your shoes off and scrunching your toes repeatedly. That actually, all those little things really help with foot and ankle injuries.
I did read that wrong. She was actually asking if you had been injured before. But no, the first part of her question was how do you prevent injury? So it sounds like you answered that right there exactly. But she was just curious if you've ever had any major injury yourself. Yeah,
actually, so 2013 was a really important year for my development as a runner, because I was chronically injured the second half of the year. I had multiple kind of interrelated things going on, related to my glute and hips and hamstring. And then I got a stress fracture in my foot. So I was just, sometimes someone told me, like, sometimes you have to break down completely to rebuild correctly. And so long story short, it really made me face up to the fact that I had pretty awful natural running form. Like, I had a lot of biomechanical flaws in terms of things like overstriding and overpronating. So when I finally got healed up and healthy in early 2014, I made a concerted effort to start to run with better form and to try to correct my imbalances or asymmetry. Because usually when we get injured, it's not so much overrunning per se. It's doing too much running in a way that stresses areas because we're running improperly on them. So if you're naturally turned out or angled it in a weird way, or you're running a certain way that puts extra stress on parts of your body, then they're going to wear out and feel pain. And so injury prevention has a lot to do with running properly and with proper biomechanics.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. And I also, going back to something you'd said near the beginning of the show, I really like the idea that you have clients who come to you not necessarily training for a race, but building back in a healthy way from an injury. And I think that's so important, because I know so many of us, and I've been guilty of it, is that as soon as you're given clearance to run again, you go out and you do the exact same stupid thing because you're trying to play catch up. So I like the idea of having somebody guide you through that. Moving on, Jeff, this is Jeff W. this time. He wants to know your thoughts on how to get faster out on the trails.
Faster out on the trails?
Mm-hmm.
So getting faster is kind of a combination of enhancing your cardio fitness so that you can process oxygen more efficiently. And there are different ways to do that, but it generally gets back to speed work. So you want to, part of your week, not a lot, maybe 10% of your running during the week, you want to do concerted speed work at a level that really raises the ceiling on how much oxygen your body can take in and process, because then you'll deliver oxygen better to your working muscles and you'll be able to go faster. So that means doing speed work, kind of intervals at close to maximum effort, to the point where you are breathing so hard you can barely say 2 words at once. And it's stressful, but that is stress in a good way, because then the progress happens on the recovery day when you're running easier again and you adapt to that stress. So to get faster means improving your cardio and practicing running faster. And then it also means improving your form. So having a more efficient form. And then getting faster on trails means practicing the kind of trail terrain that will make you more efficient. So, and that just takes practice. When you're learning how to run downhill on a really technical terrain that has a lot of rocks and slippery stuff, you get better with practice. It's not easy, but it can be done.
That faster stuff, you're going to probably find yourself a safe place for that, which is not going to be trail. I mean, are we talking like, hitting the track or something like that?
Track or time, I think track workouts are great, but doing timed intervals out on the open road can sometimes be more liberating, because you're running more by feel than by, if you're someone who goes to the track and you know that you should be doing your 800 meters in 3 minutes flat, and you get really down on yourself if you do a 3:04, then good grief, just go out in the open road and run as fast as you can for a half mile.
Yes.
Try to not get so caught up on that level of precision. So you can do timed intervals, but yes, generally speed work should be on a smooth surface. You can also, if you're doing timed intervals, I would generally say do it on flat terrain, but there's a huge benefit and will help you get faster if you do intervals on some hills as well. Okay. So doing uphill repeats.
Okay. All right. So this is from Andrew. So this is his words, not mine. So, which is more important, being able to crush the uphill or being able to run the downhill like a freaking gazelle or deer and barrel by everyone at 100 mile an hour? So
I would choose the uphill. And the reason why is because to quote unquote crush the uphill, you have to have a high level of cardio fitness. Oh my gosh, yeah. Like you can be in less shape and run downhill super fast because you don't need as much cardio fitness. But here's the thing, if you can master the uphills, you're going to be in really, really good shape. And then you can use gravity to carry you downhill. So it's kind of, you kill two birds with one stone. If you can get to the point in your fitness where you're crushing the uphills, and chances are you're going to be a good downhill runner also.
Yeah, that makes sense. Charity has a good question, and I know she's getting ready. She's kind of moving over to trails, and she's actually getting ready. I think she's doing her first trail race. I believe it's one of the Ragnar races. And so she's asking, what if you don't have easy access to trails and you're getting ready for this, how can you simulate them? And she was thinking on a treadmill, but I think there might be some better ideas than the treadmill.
Well, treadmills are great. If you have a treadmill with good incline, you can do some great hill workouts on treadmills. So I would say, vary your hills so that you do some steady climb miles at a moderate incline, like 4 to 5%, but then you crank it up to 14, 15% to practice power hiking. The downside with treadmills is a lot of treadmills don't go downhill. I mean, they might have a 2% decline, but it's hard to practice good downhill running. And if you are facing a spiky elevation profile, you have to practice downhill as well as uphill. But if you don't live in a hilly area, then first of all, use your treadmill incline. But then the best substitute is hit the stairs. So if you have a stadium nearby you or a parking structure, then do lots and lots of stair repeats. And I love stairs because they promote both strength and cardio fitness, and they also promote agility. So if you do lots of stair repeats, you're building good knee lifting, powerful uphill stride on the upstairs. And then when you run downhill, you're promoting quick-footed agility, and both will really help you on the trail. And then the third thing is to incorporate plyometrics and other lower body conditioning into your week. And so plyometrics are exercises and drills that have some kind of jumping. So whether they're box jumps or high knee skipping or bounding, all those kind of drills that you learn in high school cross country are really useful.
Oh, that's great. And she actually comes from a obstacle course racing background. So I think that should be great for her then.
Yeah, I keep meaning to learn parkour to handle some falls.
That would be a great idea.
Those OCR people are crazy. So Charity also comes back, and we're going to tie this in with a question that Trisha asked because they were very similar. Whenever you're on a trail run, what is your favorite fuel? Sword endurance drink mix. Sorry. And do you recommend eating real food on a long trail run? Or are gels good enough?
So it entirely depends on the distance, and it depends on all things. It depends on the distance, the climate, like how hot or dry it is, And thirdly, how hard you're racing.
Okay, well, let's put a scenario out there so that way we can make for an easy answer, because most people aren't going to need to fuel for anything less than 10 miles. So let's or an hour and a half. So let's talk about 2 to 3 hour trail run, and it's going to be mildly up and down, nothing mountainous, but there's some hills, and it's going to be just mild weather.
So I would start the run well hydrated and having had a light meal of a couple, 200 to 300 calories, maybe digested, so that your glycogen stores are full. And that means that you have carbohydrate already stored up in your body for quick burning fuel. And then you don't need a whole heck of a lot on a 2 to 3 hour trail run unless you are running at a really high intensity, more like a marathon or faster pace, and you want quick burning fuel. But if it's just a training run at a conversational pace, you don't need anything really for the first 60 to 90 minutes. Unless it's extra cold out, then your body is probably burning extra calories to stay warm. But, on a run like that, I just take a gel at around an hour, either gel or a little snack, maybe 45 minutes later, or I'd get my calories from sports drink. But, it's not a big deal either way. You don't need a whole heck of a lot. It's whatever works and feels good. What you want to avoid is overeating or eating too much all at once in a way that makes your stomach hurt. So if you think of digestion as working against your running insofar as your body is sending blood to your working muscles to power your muscles. And then if it's hot out, it's also sending blood toward your skin for thermoregulation to make you sweat. So those are the priorities. Your body wants to make your muscles go and make your skin cool off. So digesting is a lower priority. So if you're working hard and you suddenly eat like an entire 200 calorie bar and it just sits in your stomach, that's going to give you a stomach ache. So it's better to kind of nibble little bits or have something really easily digestible like a gel rather than a whole hunk of food. Now, if you're in a different scenario where you're on an 8-hour all-day outing over mountainous terrain, then you're going to want to eat kind of the equivalent of lunch 4 hours in, or else you're going to get really tired and hungry. So that's a really different scenario, and that's when I do shift to real food. Like I had a long training run the other day, and I deliberately started it late in the morning because I wanted to simulate ultra conditions. So I slept in, I started my run at 10, and then I packed a peanut butter and jelly roll up in a tortilla that I had a couple hours in because I needed that kind of combination of some protein and fat along with carbohydrates. So I was eating more like a hiker than a runner in that scenario. And then the final bit of advice I'd say, always with trail running, it's always better to take more calories than you think, even if you don't have them. It's not a big deal to stick a couple extra gels in your pocket, but that could save you because trail running is much less predictable than road running, and you might get stuck out there. It might take you longer, or a friend might be bonking and need it. So there's no harm in taking extra. It's just a good preventative measure.
All right.
All good advice. And so the last listener question is also one from Charity. And I love this one because sometimes I think this is something that people don't necessarily think of. So I'm glad she brought it up. And she's just wondering, is the trail runner culture different than the road running culture? And if so, how?
Yeah, well, with the growth of trail running and with it going a little more mainstream, it's all melding a little bit more. Trail running used to be equated more with ultra running, which used to be more on the fringe. But I think the sport's growing and changing. And part of my interest in writing the book was kind of to convey some of the more old school values, but and to describe the culture. So to me, the best side of trail running culture is there's a friendliness and a humility about it. So it's the trail especially a tough mountain wilderness trail, it's very humbling and it's hard for everyone. So that's one aspect. I think the culture also tends to be friendlier because the events tend to be smaller and rely heavily on volunteer effort at aid stations. So there's a potential for a camaraderie that you don't get at road races. Also, longer trail races, especially ultra distance, you're going to be running the first half at least at more of a conversational pace. And often the way runners get spread out, you're usually only around one or two other people on the trail. So whereas if you're running the Boston or Chicago marathons, you're in this horde of people all running, breathing heavily, and you're not going to be talking to one another. But if you're out on a trail with one or two other people in a race and you're all running at more of a conversational pace to get up the mountain, that fosters good conversation and often leads to some longer term friendships. And what else? I think tends to be a respect, I would hope, for the landscape and the environment, more of a sense of stewardship, of taking care of the trails. You go to a big city road race and there's this attitude of like, what's in it for me? I paid my entry fee. I need to get X, Y, and Z, and I can just toss my cup here. And whereas on a trail race, I hope people are more respectful of the volunteers and they never litter and they thank the volunteers and all that kind of stuff. So those are some of the main things that come to mind.
Yeah. All right, that's great. We've got one last question for you, and then we'll end this episode. But let's go back to your book. And the big question is, someone has read your book. What do you want their big takeaway to be from that? Whenever they think back a month, a year, 2 years, 10 years from the time that they read your book, what do you want them to take away from that and incorporate that into their lives?
Well, I end with a chapter on longevity and avoiding burnout and how to have a really healthy relationship with the sport for a lifetime of enjoyable running. So I hope the information and the stories inspires them to be a healthy runner for decades, so that they don't just think, I just did my first trail half marathon. I want to run a 50 miler next year, and that's it. That they really realize what you need to do to be healthy over many years and to have a really positive relationship with the sport. So I think it's very easy with sports to have low points or have it become negative if you're so focused on performance. And I just think it's, this sport is an avenue to enjoy the great outdoors and to stay healthy. And so I hope the takeaway would be they're inspired to definitely tap into their athletic potential and do some amazing things athletically, but also develop a relationship with the sport that will last for decades.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, Crystal, do you have any more questions?
I don't. So I just quickly want to really thank you for coming on, Sarah. This is we've learned so much, and I know that our listeners will really, really appreciate everything that you've put out there for us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, well, this has been absolutely great. And so you are all over the internet, social media. And so we've got your website at saralavendersmith.com. We've got your blog, which is www.therunnerstrip.com. And then you are on Twitter, and we'll have this all in the links because I'm sure everyone's out there listening to this podcast writing everything down, as we say. But on Twitter, you are Sarah Running, and that's your handle. And on Facebook, The Runners Trip, that's your Facebook page. And then also on Instagram at Sarah Running. And so we'll have that all in the show notes. That way, if anyone feels like they need to get a hold of you or want to buy your book or anything like that, they have the opportunity to do that. Right now, I would like to give a shout out to the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, who graciously allow us for every podcast to use their music as our intro and outro. And also make sure you visit www.heartlandrunning.com for all the show notes, some other interesting stuff there. Join our Facebook group because look, you can answer questions, you can ask questions, and you can get answers on the podcast. You can also win a book, just like you did on this episode right here. Also, if you want to give us a voicemail or a text, you can send that to 513-486-4636, and if we like it, we'll put it on the show. And also make sure you tell a friend. Also go to iTunes or whatever your podcast catcher is and give us a review. That just helps people find us. And so anyway, I think we have come to the end of our show. And so I am Andy.
And I'm Crystal.
And thank you very much for listening.